All right, Larry, big leap of faith going with Mark Jackson, a guy with no experience at all.
Well, that's the question that I've been getting, of course, since we made the hire. But obviously, we considered that, and we don't consider it to be a leap of faith. We're in a situation where we evaluated from top to bottom what he had done throughout his career, both as a player and as a broadcaster. And I understand that he hasn't sat in the seat that is the head coach's seat. If you were to hire an assistant coach, you'd probably get the same thing. He has evaluated basketball for a lot of years. And as we were talking with him, there's no question that he's been preparing to be a head coach in this league. He's given a great deal of thought to it. He studies the game. He sees the game 2 or 3 times a week from TV or however many it is, and he's got a pretty good seat. So, and he's analyzed the game very deeply, and that became obvious during our discussions with him.
Did this come quickly? We had Bob on our show the other day, and he said we're a ways away, and then boom, you hired him. So.
The end came quickly. Obvious is that it didn't come real quick as far as the overall search is concerned. It feels to me like I've been at this for 3 or 4 months. And I was glad when things began to unfold. We discussed it from top to bottom as a staff. And the great thing about it is that our whole staff was on board with it. And we don't have a group of guys who won't speak their mind. And so we didn't have to twist arms to get there or anything like that. It actually started yesterday afternoon where we were beginning to get to a culmination. And then I spoke again with Mark last night on the phone, and then again this morning, and spent some time with it, and I knew we were headed down the home stretch. I didn't think we'd get it done today, but we did, and we're very comfortable with it and also very happy with it.
You know, a lot of times head coaches are, the central figure, but a lot of times it's the assistants who become the defensive expert or the offensive expert. Has he talked about understanding that he's going to have some, maybe guys with more experience as his assistants?
He's already ahead of the game where that's concerned. One of his focal points is to hire good staff. And he knows that there are a lot of good people that are available, and he will surround himself with good assistants. And it'll be our job to do things administratively that are going to be helpful to him. And the whole purpose of this thing is to have Mark Jackson succeed as our head coach. And we're all going to dive into that and be helpful. And yet he has a strong personality, so you're not going to take anything away from him. When you meet him, you're going to understand he's the head coach. And there's going to be no doubt about it.
Joe said he wanted somebody that's going to be a long term, so this isn't a guy you're just bringing in to showcase. You're going to give him time to develop as a head coach.
There's no doubt about it, and I think it will go very quickly. It's a situation where we would like to have someone who has a number of years with us. I don't like the idea that you're going to change coaches every year or every 2 years or something like that. Joe and Peter have put together an organization here that they want to be long-lasting, and that was part of looking at it. I didn't necessarily say that we should eliminate people because of age. That wasn't necessarily it. But when we got into everything around Mark Jackson, it came down to this is the guy we want, and he does happen to have some youth. Now, it depends on how you count youth. To a 16-year-old, they wouldn't say he's young, but as basketball coaches go, he has a lot of years to coach basketball.
His biggest asset?
His biggest asset is his knowledge of the game and the strength of his personality.
How much of that has to do with the Jerry Sloans and the Larry Browns and the Pat Rileys that he's played under?
I think they've been excellent tutors, but I think Mark Jackson would have had a strong personality regardless of what he was doing.
There was a couple of changes in coaches. Detroit lost a coach, Minnesota. Was there any sense of urgency, like we've got to get our guy before all of these openings?
There really wasn't. We felt pretty comfortable that we would probably come to a conclusion pretty soon, but we were not rushed by the fact that someone else maybe dismissed a coach and that the pool might be getting a little bit smaller. I'm going to be a little bit braggadocious and say that I think we have a lot to offer here in the Bay Area, and we have great fans, and I thought we would be able to attract a good coach whatever happened. And I'm not saying that in a negative way toward anybody else, but I see this as a special place, and we wanted somebody as our coach who sees it as a special place.
And I think two guys are going to really love him, Steph and Monte, because he played that position. Is that part of the draw?
Not necessarily, but it certainly doesn't hurt that you've got a guy who's been a point guard. And we've got two of our players who happen to be two of our best players who basically are point guards, and they play together, and they're ones and twos. Certainly, it's helpful, but Mark's going to coach the whole team. There's no doubt that he'll coach the big guys, he'll coach everybody, and he'll have an impact on each one of our players.
I guess being a point guard, too, you're kind of a natural leader anyway on the floor, and that might transfer to being a coach.
You would hope so, and I look at it that way to some degree. But at the same time, you couldn't necessarily say that point guards make better coaches, because there have been a lot of great coaches who weren't point guards. But there's no question that point guards have to make decisions. They're basically the quarterback of the team. And that has to be helpful, at least to some people, as far as going forward into the coaching business.
Larry, you've been around in this business for a long time. Has the head coaching job changed in terms of how you do that job? And if so, how does that figure into Mark Jackson's job?
One of the things that's happened is that the coaching staffs have grown over the years. And, probably 30 years ago, the coaching staff was pretty small. And you might have one head coach and one assistant, and they did everything. We now have a situation where we have at least 3 assistants, usually sitting beside the head coach, and we may have some guys behind the bench. So things have gotten bigger in terms of staff size, and therefore there's probably more and more delegation of things to do. So that's changed just a little bit, but there are still some coaches who don't let their assistants do much, and then there are other coaches who let their assistants do a lot. And Mark will be one of those guys who will work with his assistants. He'll have the biggest voice, and he will be directing things. There's no question about that. Will he listen to their input? Absolutely. I'm convinced he will, because we've talked that through. I'm convinced he'll listen to it, but we're not hiring him to do anything but make decisions, to organize a staff and run the thing and be a decision maker. He'll do it.
I was thinking relief for you, the players, the fans, that you guys finally got your guy.
It is a relief. I think that you go through this process, and when you start out with it, you think that, okay, we're just going to hire a coach. Well, it's probably one of the biggest decisions that I'll make in the time that I'm here with the Warriors. Certainly a big decision for new ownership, Peter and Joe going through this. And so is there some relief to it? Certainly there is, because there are a lot of things going on right now as far as the things that we need to do to prepare to put a good team on the floor the next year.
Jerry West have any input?
Oh, yeah. We all had input. This was a collective decision, and I spoke with Jerry this morning, in fact, and had a couple conversations with him in this regard. And Jerry's here to be on the board, and he's here to be utilized to whatever extent we want to, and he's been very cooperative.
Let me follow up, if I may, about the coaching, new coaching. I mean, obviously there's more coaches and stuff, but is there a way that a head coach handles his players differently now? And is there a preference in one way or another?
That's pretty much up to the head coach for him to decide how he's going to proceed. And there are just all kinds of different ways to approach coaching. The one thing you can't do is you can't have a situation where you don't understand the game and have the X's and O's part of it down, because everybody does. Now, that's not to say that one guy maybe doesn't know a little more than another guy. That certainly can happen, but in this whole process, one of the things that I try to look at each time, several guys had notebooks, some presented, stuff on tape, and we went through all kinds of things. My concern is, how do you get what you believe into the locker room, and then from the locker room onto the floor with the players? And that was one of the selling points that I thought Mark Jackson had, was the ability to take his philosophy and get it on the floor. And that's important to me.
I think a lot of times, too, great players don't necessarily make great coaches because it came natural to them and they're not as good as teaching it. Do you worry a little bit about that, or no?
Well, there's a history of some of that, but there's also the history that goes the other way. If I'm not wrong, Pat Riley didn't coach before he took over with the Lakers. And so you have that kind of thing. Larry Bird didn't coach. And people seem to have forgotten Larry Bird had quite a bit of success. Yeah, so you've got a situation where, yeah, we could name some other guys who didn't succeed, and I don't like to go down that road, but there's some former players who haven't made it, and there's some former players who have. And I don't care to dwell on that. It's just, hey, we're ready to move forward.
And players, I think, are more apt to listen to a guy who's been there before, even though he doesn't have the experience.
There's a little bit of that, but I think players quickly figure out who knows what they're doing, and that's the most important thing. Now, having been there before and knowing what you're doing, it's an awful good combination.